Hello once again to another Chess.com podcast. My name is Michael Quigley, and today we're going to be looking at a few examples of passed pawns, connected doubled passed pawns, versus a rook. These can be found on the Chess Mentor program on the Chess.com website, so you can feel free to try these out and possibly look at a few variations we'll skip over. So this is the first example here. Black's got two pawns, one on the a3, one on the b4 squares, looking to advance and promote, and White's got a rook to stop them. Note that the two kings are far away. Now usually in this kind of example, the rook is strong enough to stop the pawns, although you'll often hear that two passed pawns are equal to a rook. This isn't quite true, and the rook tends to come out better in the endgame, but it's all knowing how to use the technique and how to stop the pawns from advancing. Well, let's start firstly by looking at an example of how to make a bit of a botched job and let Black win this. If the White rook came down to e4 to try and attack the pawn on b4, then simply a move such as a2 will win the game for Black. If Rook tries to take on b2, then we have the Queen coming with a1, queening with check, and should easily win the game there. And if we go back and say White realised his mistake and came down to e1 with his Rook, then supporting the a2 pawn with b3, Rook to a1, b2, and again we see that Black manages to queen. And in the Queen versus Rook endgame, the Queen will win. So let's go back to the beginning and look at how to win for White. Well, the strong move here, and the correct move, is the Rook to a7. What this does is that it stops the pawn on a2 advancing, because it'll be taken off by the Rook, and it also stops the b3 move. By the other pawn, again losing the pawn on the a file. Let's have a look at the b3 move first. After b3, it's simply Rook takes a3, b2, Rook to b3, and as you can see, as soon as the b pawn queens, Rook takes it off. So that's a one game for White. The only other thing to look at after moving the Rook to a7 would be, say, king moves such as king to g8. Well, here White just increases the pressure by moving the Rook down to a4, and now we can see he's attacking both pawns if they move, especially the kind of b4 pawn. So the b4 pawn is forced to move to b3, and again we have like a repeat position. Rook takes a3, b2, Rook to b3, and again it's a nice easy one endgame for White. So that's how to stop two pawns advancing if you've got a Rook and the kings are nowhere in sight. Let's look at a slightly harder example now. Actually, before we skip on, let's look at the example again, but this time with Black to move, and it's a win for Black. I forgot to mention this. The Black technique here, I'm not going to go through an incorrect technique, I'll let you do that yourself, is simply just to play b3. So now whichever pawn is attacked by the Rook, the other one will be able to either support the attacked pawn or advance itself. I'll show you what I mean now. If the Rook comes to b7, say, attacking the b3 pawn, then b2, and the a3 pawn can support the b2 pawn. The Rook comes to a7, then the b pawn will advance and promote. The other way of looking at this is just to simply play a2, giving up the b3 pawn. If the Rook comes to a7, then b2, the Rook has to take one of these two pawns off, and then we have a Black win. I'll let you play with the endgame with both White and Black. Okay, we have time for two more quick examples. Again, it's White to move here, and how should the Rook stop the pawn advancing this time? Well, if the Black pawn and the Black king aren't on the 5th rank, and here they're not, they're effectively on the third rank. Then it's usually a one endgame for the white rook. If the pawn and king are on the 5th rank, or there are 2 pawns on the 6th rank, then usually it's a one endgame for black, or the rook will have to sacrifice itself if the white king is too far away, and it'll be a draw. So, looking at this position, what should white do? Well, what white needs to do is to stop the king being able to support the advancement of the pawn. And to do this, the correct move is rook to h5, stopping the black king from passing the 4th rank here, or getting onto the 4th rank. d5, quite a logical move. And then we bring the white king in. King to b7, d4, so pushing the pawn forward. But now we have king c6, and with king c6 we can see that white's taken control of the d5 square. So after d3, rook d5, the pawn will drop and white will win the endgame. Going back, if black knows that of the importance of this d5 square, he may try to play a move such as king d6, but this doesn't stop the white king from advancing really, because after king b6, protecting the c5 square from encroachment of by the black king, black has to play d4. Then we have king b5, again d3 seems the only option, and king c4, and we see that black has advanced behind the black position. With d2, again rook d5, and the pawn will drop just in time. So that's an interesting endgame there, and we can see the importance of just getting control of key squares on the file where black is trying to promote his pawn. Now, going to look at a slightly different example where the white king is in front of the black pawn. Okay, this is the last example in our very simple rook versus pawn endgames, and it's just illustrative of how much easier it is for the rook to win if the white king can help in a more productive way by being in front of the black pawn. Now, in this example here, all the white king has to do is to support the rook in attacking the black pawn. By simply ganging up on the pawn, it'll win. So we play rook to h6, and the king is forced away from its pawn. Let's say king e7. The move is pretty relevant because king d5 wins the black pawn, and it's nearly one endgame. Very simple illustrative example there, but something that will come in handy later on when we look at some of the more complex rook versus pawn endgames. Thank you for watching another Chess.com podcast. Like I said, there's going to be more on these rook versus pawn endgames, and I hope you find them very instructive. If you have any suggestions or improvements we could make, we'll be more than happy to try and incorporate them into future podcasts. Thank you very much.